And that'll get us live right about now. Thank you very much for joining us with Robert Jackson Bennett. We appreciate you. And Robert, thank you so much for being here. It's great to talk with you. So thank you so much. Would you like to introduce yourself to everybody and let them know who you are?
Sure. I'm Robert Jackson Bennett. I am a fantasy writer. My last series that I finished up was the Founders trilogy. That's Foundry Side and Shorefall and Lochlands. The one previous to that was the Divine Cities. That is City of Stairs, then City of Blades, and City of Miracles. And I've written some other stuff before that. Probably most notable would be like American Elsewhere, which was the science fiction novel that I wrote just before City of Stairs.
Right. Well, in addition to all of this, you have been nominated for a Locus Award, a British Fantasy Award, a Hugo Award, a Dragon Award. Oh, and by the way, have won the Shirley Jackson Award, British Fantasy Award, Philip K. Dick Award. Do you feel like you've done enough already, or do you feel like there are more mountains to hurdle?
What's funny is that if you were to graph these things, like as my sales have gone up and I've become a more successful writer, my awards have just gone completely down. So it does feel like there is like, I don't know, like an audit that they do where they're like, is this guy close to surviving off of what he's writing? Because if so, he's not getting any plaque trophies. So it's kind of weird.
They hold you up. They prop you up.
Yeah. It has tapered. I think the last one that I got was for best series for the Divine Cities, and that was 2017 or 2018 for the Hugos. It was really funny because Brandon Sanderson was also up for that one, and we were up against Lois McMaster, like Bujold, and that was the first time that I got to meet him. And his first thing was like, "How do you feel about losing to Lois, which is going to happen in the next 45 minutes?" And he was right. Yeah.
Do you enjoy going to these ceremonies and hanging out with the authors, or is it all just pressure?
Well, they're pretty, like the ceremonies themselves, except for the Hugos, are pretty low key. Like the Shirley Jackson Awards, I don't know if it's changed because I haven't been there for a decade. But it was held in a like a hotel block, and a hotel like meeting room. Yeah, people were not dressed up. It was laid back and cool. There was a microphone, people reading off lists and like making speeches. It was cool. So a lot of these things are not pressure. The one that was a lot of pressure, it was 2012, was the Edgar Allan Poe Award.
Okay.
It was a mystery writers convention for those awards, and like you could tell that they make more money than fantasy writers because they were showing up in tuxedos and shit. And like it was a plated 4-course like dinner and a giant hotel in New York. Like Neil Gaiman was there. I got to meet him. And I was 28, 29 or something like that. And like I showed up and I consumed far too much wine. I did not think I was going to win because I was up for best paperback like original, which I think was a category they had just invented. And when I won, like I got up there, that was when I realized you really should write speeches down. You think you're going to say cool stuff off the cuff, and buddy, you're not. There's no such thing as like, being able to wing it and like win it like on panels, like if you're talking to a person, you can do that. But when it's like a big speech that you're supposed to give it to a microphone before like a lot of people, you're just going to wind up looking like a dumbass. And that's what I did. And then I got off the stage as quickly as possible. So that one was high pressure. I honestly don't know if I want to do that one again. Though it was very nice that my publisher, for some reason, was willing to pay for all that wine.
Well, I like the idea of getting up in front of a group of people, winning an award, not having any notes, and being a little tipsy while you're doing it. It's like, good luck, pal. Have a great time.
Yeah. Yes. It was a very unwise set of circumstances for me. I had like children in the audience. Like someone brought their grandkids, and I was like, oh man. They were all dressed up too. Getting those kids in those suits was something.
Well, after going through all this experience with, being a part of the awards and having a group of successful novels, are you at the point where you're like, okay, I'm satisfied. I feel like I have arrived at the kind of level that I was hoping for. when I was in high school or college? Or do you still struggle with imposter syndrome, or gee, I'd really like to be up here doing this? Is it satisfaction or desire?
No, I think satisfaction is, I think like if you are someone who is easily satisfied by stuff, you probably might struggle as a writer. I think most writers that I know, um, like for me personally, I hate everything that I've ever written except the thing that I'm writing right now. I'm like that. This one's gonna be it. This is gonna be the cool one. Usually, as soon as I'm done with a novel, I just kind of stop thinking about it because, like, it's never exactly how you want it to be. You
Mm.
always learn lessons, and you want to apply those lessons to something new. So hate might be a strong word, but I'm like, there is a voice inside of my head, like that last thing that I did, it didn't work out great. Like I'm trying to, like, always trying to pitch myself on the next like big deal, um,
Wow.
or the next big plan. So I'm like, that last one, yeah, I know, didn't work out great. This next one though, it's gonna change everything. So it's usually like the process of writing is sort of intoxicating in a way. I think partially because you almost always get to start with a clean slate.
Yes.
Writing a full series actually was quite a challenge for me because you by default cannot start with a clean slate. And I, like in the Founders Trilogy, I was trying to position myself in places where the slate was at least somewhat clean or brand new. And um, but that was very tricky for me, because the appeal of writing to me is getting to wipe it all over, start fresh, and create something new each time.
So to you, the journey is the destination. As soon as the journey is over, you put it behind you and you're on to the next thing.
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say like there's like you're always kind of, it's less journey and more chase.
Okay.
Like there's always like, there's the line about how a sculptor can see shapes inside of the stone, like waiting to be a sculpture.
Right.
You're always aware that there's a little bit like that there's a little bit more in the rock that you could have captured, and this time you're going to get all of it. Of course, the opposite is entirely true because the reality is, like, although you learn all these new lessons and things like that each time you write a story, um, every time you write a book, it feels a little bit like your first book, where suddenly you're like, where, how the hell do I start this thing? Like, how do I make the main character sympathetic right off the bat?
Uh-huh.
Things like that are always a little bit of a struggle. It's never totally a breeze. And if it is a breeze, that's probably actually a problem because you always want to be trying to do something a little bit new and thus a little bit hard.
Nice. Yeah, the struggle is part of it. I like. We're going to talk about the beginnings of books later because you've talked about that previously. I want to ask you about that. But before we get too much further, I want to give you the opportunity at the beginning. If someone is watching this interview and doesn't get any further in this interview than this, and they've never come across your work before, who is the kind of reader that you appeal to? What is a reason that someone should start reading your books? What's unique about your work that is a draw for people? And what's maybe the first thing that you think they might want to read first?
I think the one of the bigger draws for my work is the world building and the level of history that I put into things that I'm making, as well as the level of systems that I put into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like my ideal reader is probably that person who listens to too many podcasts and can't wait to tell you about this cool thing that they just learned about, like sewers or something like that. Or like, do you know why we have a dessert spoon and why the best ones are made out of gold? Well, I heard this thing today. Here's why. That's probably my ideal reader. The people who really want to know more and to learn about the sort of weird things that support our reality, our way of life. That's kind of my jam. Like one of the things that fascinates me and that I'm a little bit proud of is, like, you read something like Lord of the Rings, or you even watch the show that came out recently, and you're consciously aware, like, I haven't seen a toilet once in this. I have no idea how these people use the bathroom. I have no idea, like, how any of like the normal human stuff works, the gross everyday part of being a human. I like worlds and stories that acknowledge the complexity of human life. Like you got to have a place to put that kind of stuff. You got to have a way, like how are you getting food? Who's getting the food? What are the market systems for this, that, and the other? Are the roads of high quality? That kind of stuff is something that like fascinates me, because a lot of strange and crazy and insane things have happened in history due simply to these mundane like systems, how they talk to one another, how they work, and the sort of lifestyles they create.
There was one of those, for example, is you were talking in another interview about how we developed the idea of politically left and politically right.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a fantastic, example of you don't see how these things come into your life
Mm-hmm.
and become part of it, but it's all part of how the system is designed. So if you've got a curious and inquisitive mind, this is probably a good author to hang out with. Would you recommend any one of your books as the first one for someone to explore?
I'd probably say City of Stairs or Foundry Side. I think City of Stairs Foundry Side is my best-selling book, but City of Stairs seems to have the larger cultural impact. I feel like people think of me as the City of Stairs guy. I don't totally know. That is a book that is about history. Foundry Side is about like engineering and like how all the complex like systems work together. So it kind of depends if you're a history person, if you're more of a systems person, which one you'd prefer to go with.
Nice.
But definitely one of those two.
So let's talk about you as a kid a little bit. Where did you start out when you're pre-puberty? Are you a jock? Are you a nerd? Are you hiding in a closet? Are you a musician? Are you slinging hash on the street? What are you doing as a kid?
I was an arts nerd. I was a kid. I played viola as a kid, and I was like, that was my life. Everyone thought I would grow up to be a professional concerto violist.
Like
I
high school first chair,
junior high school, college. Yeah, competed in like lots of events. I went to college for it. I did one semester, and I was like, I actually, although I'm somewhat good at this, I don't actually like doing this that much. Like you could tell as soon as you see people who like doing this, you're like, oh, I'm not like you. This is your thing. This is not my thing. But as a kid, like I was definitely the kid who like, rather than listening to heavy metal, like once I got home and feeling all angsty and young, I listened to like Shostakovich. I read lots of like philosophy. I read Camus as a kid a lot. I was insufferable as fuck now that I'm saying this out loud. I love Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, and I was like the kid who was like, I'm 16 years old and I'm gonna read Ulysses. And like there was a big thing in my family where we had to watch like the top 100 films on the like AFI list.
The
so I got
AFI
really
list, yeah.
like Stanley Kubrick in a big way as a kid. I mean, I was probably a very insufferable child. I also had a really bad stutter, so I also didn't do a lot of talking to almost anybody. I had a very small circle of friends, I think that it's hard for me to tell. I think that like people either had no idea what to do with me, or I set off lots of red flags. I was the angry silent kid who was looking at like Clockwork Orange pictures.
And maybe a little too smart for your own good.
Possibly. And grade wise, you might not have known that, but something like that.
So were you the type of kid that was satisfied? These books, these films, this art, this music, this accomplishment is what gives me joy, and I don't need that much out of other people in my life? Or were you the lonely kid despite all that, where you had a couple of people that you could relate to, but maybe felt on the outside?
Like I liked art, but I was definitely a lonely kid. Like I definitely wanted to have I definitely wanted to have more friends and to have more like relationships and to be seen and be loved. And although I did have like some pretty good friends as a kid, I don't like, it's hard for me to look back on any one of them and be like, this relationship was very significant to me.
Okay.
And this person really got me. Probably, most child relate. I think that, culturally we have a weird thing where we expect children to have like soulmates or to have deep like relationships of some kind of like, this is my super duper best friend and we'll always be like this forever.
Right.
But now that I've got kids of my own, these kids have no fucking idea how to like relate to one another or be civilized. And we have like, there's like some kids who come over and they're like almost 12 years old. They have like hair in places and stuff. But when they feel like one of them is playing with one kid and not the other one, like I found this kid outside like crying at like in my house, and I was like, I don't know what to do right now. You're like practically a grown up and you're weeping like a small child. So like, although I probably like was a lonely kid, and definitely wanted to have more relationships, I also now doubt if that was even really a possible thing until you're like 22 or 23 or something like that.
Well,
maybe girls can do that, not boys.
Well, and developing those relationships has to be hard if you're self-conscious about a stutter.
Yeah,
And
it was.
if you're smarter than everybody else, that kind of puts you off to the side.
Yeah, it was also like they were like trying to call my friends and ask if they could play. That was absolute torture. I would have to talk to an adult that I didn't know that well and ask for a child. And so that was always just like the worst thing. I hated it. Okay. But I wanted to play or do something. So I would have much rather have like gotten on my bike and ridden all the way over there. That would have been the thing to do rather than try and call them on the phone.
Okay, so I have to ask, you have a beautiful speaking voice. At what point did you make the turn out of the stutter? Was that a long conscious effort? Was it a yeehaw moment?
Yeah, it was a long conscious effort. Okay. When I got out of college, I took up a job at a call center and just had to figure out how to talk all the time.
Did you do that intentionally?
Kind of. It was also really easy to get that job. I did not have a lot of great job guidance out of college. Like there were people who were working at that call center who like were definitely either getting off of drugs or still on drugs, and not like the fun, simple little ones, like the ones with like needle marks and shit. So if you were ever like back in like, 2007, if you were calling calls like tech support, you were getting a weird bunch of like losers. So, but they did pay, and that's all that I needed.
That's fantastic. So as you begin to come out of your shell, well, you make a change. Your freshman year in college, you go, you know what? I've been working at this for 10 years. I'm done. Mm-hmm. Where do you go from there? What drew you next?
Well, my parents were both like English majors, and like literature and poetry and plays and all that stuff was very much a big part of my life growing up. So I went into being an English and government science major I think I really did plan on being a writer even then. I was like, I'm just going to work shit jobs until I can pull off being a writer. That was insane looking back on it. Like I would not recommend to my children now to make that sort of a choice. But like at the end of like, my senior year, everyone's like, which law school are you going to go to? And I was like, and then I would like meet lawyers at parties and they'd be like, don't be a lawyer. Which was also probably pretty bad advice. Yeah, I kind of made a choice. I was going to do I had a very like romantic idea in my head of being a Charles Bukowski sort of down and out, filthy, authentic. I want to live an authentic life full of pain and suffering.
Yes.
And
dirty,
a lot of that,
filthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I did a pretty good job at that until I was about 26. And I kept writing all throughout that. But I don't think it made me a better, wiser, smarter, better person in any kind of way. And like I got a real good glimpse at some of that stuff, and I realized that being an alcoholic is a full-time job. Mm-hmm. It is not a hobby.
That's right. It's 8 hours a day, kids. You got to work at it.
Yeah, you got to work at it. You got to really know where to invest your liquor money.
So was part of becoming a writer, okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask this. Is part of that fulfilling kind of what you imagined mom and dad wanted for you?
I know.
Okay.
No. They were like, that's going to be really hard. I don't think that's going to work. I think that they supported my writing efforts, and they were very supportive people. but I think that they would have been insane not to be like, what the hell is he doing? And I think that they were like, he's just trying to find himself, which was true at the time. They weren't stupid. But I remember being in like high school, be like, I want to be a writer, like when I grew up, and my mom being like, that's really hard. Yeah, and like looking back on it, I mostly just got very, very lucky to be here. Um, but no, I don't think that like that, and that like that was necessarily something that was just in the stars for me. I continue to think that luck played a very huge role in all of this.
So can you talk about that a little bit? Was it luck that you managed to create something that drew an audience and, oh, this is interesting. Yes, we can publish this. Or yes, there's going to be an audience for this. Or is it luck that, the stars aligned at the right time to allow one thing to happen that changed?
Kinda. I
Okay.
mean, like the thing with writing is just surviving because there's so many writers who are putting out good stuff and due to personal life stuff or due to like changes at like of like the personnel or staff at a publishing house in the middle of like trying to launch a book, that can sink a career. Or like, based like my first book was Mr. Shivers, which is basically me trying to do my best Cormac McCarthy impression, which I think is probably a book, especially in like the mid aughts, that all young white men with too many degrees who are too self serious eventually write. They're like, yeah, of course, I got one of those in me. And that was the one that got published, and they got published as horror. And at the time, everyone was like, horror's going to be a really big deal. Horror's coming back. Like there's all these like zombie books that are coming out. Horror's going to have like a renaissance and people are going to love it again. And as it turned out, the only thing that was coming back was zombie books. Horror itself was dead. As well as like, especially like super arty, like inaccessible kind of horror novels about hobos in the 30s, like killing people in a ditch, which is what my book was. And so like it got a really big push and only did like middling well. It got like a C minus, I would say, as far as like success rate went. It got all these like fancy like reviews. It was very well reviewed. That was a great lesson learned, that reviews don't mean shit. If it's not getting tapped into the right audience, then it's not going to matter whatsoever. And like it even got bought by Walmart. They bought it in paperback. Like they bought 50, like some buyer at Walmart was like, I like this, I'm going to push it. And they bought 50,000 copies of it, if I recall, to push in Walmart in paperback. And it still didn't take off because nobody at Walmart is into like super artsy horror about hobos again. And so like that should have been like, kind of looking back on it, like a career killer, especially since like I tried to pivot and do like more like private eye stuff, science fiction stuff. I was just trying on hats to see what worked. And I was very lucky to have my career survive that. It really shouldn't have. Especially these days. Like these days, I don't think like where, you're like the marketing process and Goodreads and Amazon and things like that and social media, I don't think that there's as much runway that they give people to figure out what they're doing.
Right.
The idea of a second chance, there's not a lot of second chances out there. There's definitely not a lot of third chances out there. And I feel like I got like 6 chances. So that I do ascribe to luck.
That's phenomenal. And it's really something to be able to recognize it as being luck, right place, right time, right kind of support, rather than kind of that ego of going, I've done all this myself. Now, obviously, you did the work and kept bringing out work and bringing out books, but I appreciate the humility that goes along with being able to say, I got the right help at the right time.
Yeah. I like people kept giving me chances. That's luck. And that it was the right people at the right place to read this right book and say, I'm going to give this guy a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really like about you is that you're a capitalist, right? You talk about, I write this kind of thing because I would like to make money being a writer. You talked about short fiction, and it's like, oh, would you return to short fiction? No, thank you. Mm-hmm. If all the tethers were off and they're going to pay you 7 figures for the next thing you write, no matter what it is, given carte blanche, what would you enjoy doing most next?
Probably what I'm doing now. Like I like writing novels. I've got like that's kind of a thing that I've practiced a lot. Like short fiction to me is a much like it is harder. Like it's harder to take a picture that captures a huge amount of things than it is to make a movie. Like a movie has got some bloat in it, some fat,
Mhm.
always. If you were to take all of the fat away off of a movie, it would be one picture. And so trying to produce that one picture is much, much harder. So to get really good at short fiction, you have to practice very hard in an unforgiving art for a small market that does not pay well. So it is the most effort for the least gain. It is the most art for the least money, the most like talent, the most practice, all of that. So it's very unforgiving in a way, like especially nowadays where I think there's so much content, it's a shitty word, but it's true, that's out there. Like people start to expect, like, so I'm going to pay like $4 for this on Audible. I don't know, $10, whatever. Like this is something to listen to that I'm going to buy. How many minutes of enjoyment am I going to be buying with that?
Yeah.
So you're competing with so much more stuff now. That I think that to get that short fiction especially is a really tricky thing to try to pitch people. Like that's why I think a lot of the great short story writers are older. They're like in the late 40s or 50s or so, because they're of an era where that market was there and was at least somewhat hungry. I think now, like it's a lot trickier to try and do that.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about influences. Can we start with Le Carre?
Sure. John Le Carre, I think, is
Oh my gosh,
how
I've been
you.
pronouncing it wrong my entire life.
I think that's it. Yeah, he wrote Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. But my first book of his that I read was The Spy Who Came In from the Cold. And what impressed me so much about him was it's very character based. It has a lot of plot, but it's character based stuff about a secret world that is mundane and dirty and shitty, and yet is also like alluring. To know how this whole thing works is fascinating, like in its own way. And like I do find that like I think the only like woman that I know who has ever really liked his books is my mom, who loved his books. I think his stuff is very like appealing to men, especially because they're all like moral sad sacks who failed and are still soldiers. They're like he's a white collar soldier kind of person who fights with his mind and has failed and has been bruised by his efforts to be moral, and now is kind of a soft alcoholic and yet still getting laid on the reg. And so I think a lot of like guys are like, sure, I could be that. And so when I read his stuff now, I'm always like conscious of the fact that this is sort of like James Bond for people with grad school degrees. But like the other thing that I think is really interesting about him is that he's one of the very few thriller writers or spy writers at all that acknowledges class and wealth. Most don't do that. Like there might be like a rich bad guy, but there isn't like an analysis of the way class makes like moral action harder or more complex. And so that was one of those books that really like his writing in general is one of those things that made me feel like inspired to try and capture these macro level trends in societies that shape what choices our characters have.
Okay. This makes me need to leap forward here very quickly because this is something I really want to ask you about. One of the quotes that you had was part of being human is that we take reality and we change it. And you talked about power inequalities and how that changes people on either side of the divide, how that changes the landscape, how that changes a city.
Mhm.
What is the thing that draws you to those power inequalities? Is that something that was built into your life? Is it just really fun to write about? Is it seeing injustice in the world and wanting to address it? What's the draw for you?
I think it is attractive to me because it captures our own powers as human beings to build systems that can make our lives easier. But it also captures injustice. Like it is
Uh-huh.
both a virtue and it is a weakness. Like the classic example is a car and a flat tire. Like if you are a wealthy person and you have a car, then you can bring the world to you pretty easily. Within 2 to 3 hours, the world will come to you as you need it to be. It might take some work, but you can make space collapse more or less. But if
That's a
you are a poor
fascinating way to
person,
say it.
yeah, but if you're a poor person and your car breaks down, you can't go anywhere. And you're living in a world that demands you move, that demands you like navigate space. But instead now everything's collapsed in a way that's much worse. You can only like you're gonna have to call people, walk. You have to try and get try and find a way to like if your car breaks down, if it's in the shop or like you can't afford to put it in the shop, that changes your entire world experience. And like that's one of the small ways that class and power really changes how reality works for different people.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely wanted to and I think in all of my stories, I've always wanted to look at that,
Yeah.
to see how our capabilities to shape reality as a human being are often are often like influenced by our own histories, by our wealth, but also are like improvised. Like in the moment, there's a problem and someone kind of proposes a fix as they shoot from the hip, and then that fix becomes an integral part of the culture, like of the next 10 to 40 years, something
Yeah.
like that.
It's the pebble in the pond, and those
Yeah.
ripples go far out past what the initial impact ever was.
Yeah, and like in Foundry side, I start to look at magic as coding. But if you are a coder, you will know, or if you've worked with technology, you will know that there's probably some weird, messy, nasty, clunky crap that is still like puttering away in your system and the thing that you've made, that you know that you might not that might not even be yours. I mean, it might be like something that someone made 5 6 years ago, but it's still there. You don't understand it anymore, but you can't touch it, because if you do, who knows what's going to happen. So it's these flaws that we bake into the world around us
Mm-hmm.
that control, like that are like usually very old, but control how we act in the present. I find that very fascinating.
Nice. So let's talk about Terry Pratchett a little bit. And what was Terry's influence on you in terms of writing the second series?
Like his stuff is very like systems oriented.
Yes.
But he's all about how the world works and how it doesn't work and how it obeys the whims of the people who live in it, and all the loopholes. He's always about the loopholes and the little like ways that we shape the things that control us. And I think like what really like opened my eyes for him was when I read a comment that he really isn't a fantasy author. He is a science fiction author, because most like fantasy authors really don't put that much time and effort into like, here's how this shit works. Here's how
Yeah.
the mail works. This whole book is about how to send mail. That's usually not the realm of a fantasy story. His stuff is dressed up as a fantasy story. It's got
Mhm.
armor and helmets and swords and things like that, but it usually really isn't. And I kind of think that I fall into that same line where my stuff is fantasy, but it's usually just dressed up as fantasy. It's usually like science fiction or something else that is dressed like fantasy.
Mhm. Well, I found the quote that I was looking for, which was you had said, cities are organic, improvised creations, full of artifacts and mistakes and sloppiness and problems. People propose an immediate solution to a problem, then everyone has to live with those solutions for a generation or two, and plenty of them go on to cause more problems than they solve. I love that way of looking at the world as seeing things as dealing with generational madness that has continued long past its point of use.
Yeah. Like I would say that a lot of the way we engage with human past is saying, well, I guess you didn't think about that. Like there's this thing that you were trying to do, and the way that you try to do it had this other effect that you're now all living with. And everyone's saying, well, I guess you didn't really think about that, did you? Huh? And so we try and build new fixes for these new problems. I don't think of this as a dystopic. I think a lot of people probably think of that, like balls of problems or like a big knot of things that you've created. Because I think this is just how it works. And I do think that there are ways to slowly change and shape how things function. It is slow going and it is hard, but it definitely can be done. Right. But yeah, the way, like the word for this is path dependency. Okay. Which is once you get started on a path, it creates an incumbency, a system of people who are in a position and now they don't want to leave that position. And that shapes their own little worlds, their own little towns, like oil. Like there's all these towns in Texas and South Dakota and like Pennsylvania that that were thrown up as sloppy little towns built to exploit this one resource, and lots of them are still out there. And lots of them have representatives who vote, and they want to keep things just as they are. So those little sloppily improvised solutions now have cemented a political power base that's going to be hard to dislodge. Things like that.
Yeah. And that continues on. I want to switch out of that idea real quick to address something that you had talked about earlier. Starting a book, and then we're back to your writing process. Starting a book is a really difficult thing to do. And for you, that's probably the big mountain at the beginning, because once you've gotten past that section, it doesn't necessarily become downhill, but it stops. The climb is not so steep. How do you address your beginning, knowing that this is an obstacle? How do you address the beginning when you know, okay, I'm starting, Locklands is done, moving on?
The way I've come to think about this is that the start of a novel is a little bit like in Pacific Rim. They have this thing where to power the giant robots, it has to be two people, and their brains have to come into alignment for it to work. And that's a hard process to come into alignment, to share thoughts. And the start of a novel really is trying to get the reader to come into alignment with the mind space that you're thinking, to sort of give them a glide path toward the place that you are making in their heads. And that's really hard, because you have to propose to them usually a problem that is comprehensible, but is attached to much larger complexities that will be explored later, but can't be explored in that first chapter. You find a dead body. It turns out that the guy who's dead is the servant to the prince, is the prince of this kingdom, and the kingdom has his magic power, blah, blah, blah. It has to expand outward from that. Right. You can't load it up at the start and be like, so there's this magic. No one's going to read that thing. At the same time, you have to put smaller problems in the way of the protagonist that aren't there to be useless, but are there to sort of fill in the comprehension of the world, the character, the plot. These are sort of ways to drop in or inject information to the reader's consumption of the text. And while you're doing, you have to do this quickly too. They're only going to give you probably about 20 minutes of reading. If they like really think that your book is very good and have heard great things about it, it might be more than that. But you can really only capture them in the first, I'd say, 2 to 5,000 words. Those 2 to 5,000 words have to do so much work to bring them like into alignment with the text. And so when someone says something of a book that is like successful and is consumed by lots of people and blah, blah, I tried to start it, but it just didn't grab me. The opening felt so slow. I didn't understand what was going on. Those comments, I mean, like those are criticism and it's fair and art subjective and whatever. But to me, what they really all like articulate is I was not able to come into like alignment with what this book was trying to do, especially the slow one. If someone's like, it just felt real slow, I didn't really want to find out what happened next. To me, that is the signal that they just couldn't dock to your mothership.
Right. So getting that beginning into that kind of shape where it becomes, here we go, and you're taking them on and you've got that first 3,000 words that work is a difficult hurdle to tackle.
Yeah, and I think that most writers would agree with that. The opening is the place where the words are, every word is doing the most work. Because it has to be something that they can consume right away, but still makes them hungry for more. Like it has to be something comprehensible, but also mysterious. It has to be something that like where the characters themselves are affable and personable, compelling, and yet also removed, so you want to learn more. Like that's hard. You're doing so many things at once. So I think like it's hard. If there was someone who said like, for me, the opening of a story, that's the easiest part, I would think that person was a liar.
Clearly you've never done this before. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions that came out of the Oasis really quickly. But what is your favorite genre to write? Do you have any one thing that you feel like you're drawn to more than another?
I like mysteries. I think I'm good at them. And I think that most of my books have been mysteries in some format or another.
Got it.
Like City of Stairs starts off as a murder mystery. Someone's been killed and they got to find out who did it. Blades is a spy story. So is Miracles. Like Foundry Side is kind of a heist thriller where you're not quite sure what's happening and they want to find out more. And I think that that's true of lots of stories. Like the first 4 Harry Potter books are mystery books where there's something weird going on. I've got my list of suspects. I've got my ideas about plot, and it's all very tightly structured. You know, you got the weird thing that happens on like when they're first trying to get to Hogwarts. Then you got the weird thing that happens on Halloween, a weird thing that happens at Christmas, something Quidditch, and then like the last day of exams is when it always comes to close. It's very tightly structured and predictable. And I'd argue that those first 4 novels are more enjoyable and make more sense than a lot of the latter ones where it starts trying to do all this other stuff, to try and do more high fantasy stuff.
Right.
That's when it starts to get kind of muddy.
And you talked about magic systems based on dead animals in sticks. And
yeah, right. Like, you know, that's another subject entirely as to exactly how like wizards figured out that if you take this piece of this creature's heart and put it in a stick and say some Latin words, you can make birds appear out of nothing. Like to me, like I'm like, how do they get to that? But so that's always been something that I feel like I kind of am pretty good at. And like that's why actually for my new series, it is going to be a murder mystery series set in a fantasy world where the like main character's job is to figure out who did it. It's a little bit of a whodunit. So if I were to say like what it's like Knives Out meets Game of Thrones, something like that.
The high fantasy equivalent of Knives Out.
Right. That's probably the best way to put it.
That's going to be magnificent.
I hope so.
How excited are you for Glass Onion?
I am very excited. I really like whodunits. I really like his work. Brick is a great movie. That is also a noir like mystery. He's very good at this. I like Looper has some of those like same elements in it as well. So I think this is one of his like sweet spots as I think this is his sweet spot too. So I will be really curious to see it. But I also like how it's trying to it's sort of like bringing that whole genre back. There was another movie like See How They Run, which was trying to do a riff on all that stuff, but I think it kind of disappeared in its own like shenanigans. Sure. I just saw it like the other day. It like started out pretty strong, was fun, and then I think it forgot what it was doing. I think when it made like Agatha Christie a real character in the third act who gets rolled up in a carpet, I was like, what are you doing now? I don't understand. But like whodunits are fun because of their like staginess and as well as like they are very character based. Like it's all about like the best ones are always very character based where the crime is related to some great human flaw.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for pursuing that, because boy, is that something I think a lot of people would enjoy reading. So thank you I hope you get over that initial hurdle in your first 3,000 words. So the rest of it smooths out, because, I cannot wait.
That one's done, actually. That one's in the can. So I think I got the opening done. I'm writing the sequel to that one now. It's not completely under contract yet. I can't, like, for these sorts of books, I really like writing them. So I went ahead and got started on this early. So yeah, I think it's clicking along pretty good. I've said that before, only to have my hopes crushed later, where I was like, oh, this actually isn't working. But I'm having a lot of fun.
All right. Well, I promised we would go about 45 minutes, and I'm past it. So first of all, I would like to say thank you. Second, I'd like to say everybody who has watched this, please go into the Oasis and stuff the ballot boxes for Robert Jackson Bennett with Lochlands, because we want him to win at the end of the year. And I just, again, thank you so much for coming on. Are you ready at this point for 2 minutes and your pop quiz?
Sure. Fire away.
All right. 2 minutes with Robert Jackson Bennett. And here we go. The zombie apocalypse is coming. Your family is safe. Who are the 3 people that you want on your team?
3 people like of my family, or like from like a fantasy series about you?
Anyone you like. Your family is safe, so you don't have to take them into consideration.
Oh boy, I guess the Hulk.
Yeah.
And let me see here. I guess one of the Harry Potter. Well, no, in Harry Potter you can't summon food, so we're out of luck on that one. I guess from Avatar, one of the waterbenders for healing and be able to grow food, help us grow food there. And Gilbert Gottfried. I always liked his comedy. Shame he died too early.
That's perfect. That's exactly who you need on your team. Who is your biggest childhood crush?
My biggest child, Courtney Cox.
Cool. Oh, beautiful.
Didn't even have to think about that one.
That is just from the hip.
People were all about Jennifer Aniston. I was like, she's right there.
You're missing out, boys and girls. You got the wrong one. Have you ever named a car? And if so, what was its name?
I had a Mitsubishi truck in high school that was before like Mitsubishi really figured out cars. I think it had a fan engine instead of a car engine. And it was incredibly small. And we named it the Spiteful Truck.
The Spiteful Truck.
It just seemed angry.
If you could describe the perfect reader for your work, what would they look like?
Someone who has lots of money that's in liquid format. And doesn't necessarily, they don't necessarily have to read all my stuff. They just have to put points towards my royalties.
Sounds perfect. Let's see. If you had to sing karaoke, which song would you pick?
My preferred option is Tom Trobert's Blues.
Oh, fantastic.
And
and we're out of time. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you.